Hey everyone, let's quickly recap the RapidID improvement problem solving method and then apply it to a couple of typical business problems. So what is this process of RapidID improvement, the most important process in organizations? We always start from a problem. Let's not focus here too much on what a problem is, but it's basically a goal, an improvement that you want, and some bottlenecks and constraints that prevent you from achieving the goal right away or in some automatic fashion. What happens next is that you come up with an idea. You come up with an idea to solve the problem, an idea for doing something that fixes the bottleneck and constraints in such a way that the goal is reached. Now, from there on, we have two routes. First, the bad route is to justify that that idea is good already. We typically do that via appeal to authority or our belief in the solution or experience that has to justify the solution or data. And that is obviously no ID improvement because you're literally saying that the ID is already good enough. So why would you improve it? That's the one route that is not fruitful for ID improvement. The other one is that you come up with a challenge to that ID. So you try to find a consequence of doing the ID that is undesired, that falls out of the goal. Something you don't want, something about the ID that doesn't work. From that position, having such a challenge, again, there's two routes. The bad route, again, is to say that the challenge is a kind of proof that the problem is not soluble, that we should forget about the problem or that we should go back to the problem and look there for something. But that's obviously also no ID improvement. The other route, the route that is ID improvement, is to come up with a variant to the ID1 that still solves the problem. In other words, it reaches the goal or parts of the goal, and it does not have that undesired consequence, that consequence that didn't correspond to the goal. Once you have followed that pathway, so the two green arrows, you have objectively improved the ID, objectively versus ID number one. So the variant is objectively better than the ID one. That's how we improve IDs via this two-step approach and avoiding the two, let's say, red avenues that do not lead to ID improvement. Now, problem solving, the method at least, is independent of the type of problem you're solving. And so for business problems, a lot of the varieties of problems can be tackled using this problem solving approach. For example, how to improve process efficiency, how to increase sales effectiveness, how to improve the definition of a product or a value proposition, or even how to manage a project effectively. Let's try to apply our problem-solving method to the problem of managing a project. So starting with the goal is always to deliver a project on time, in scope, and on budget. So we can describe in more detail what the timing is, the scoping, and the available budget to deliver the project. Now, along the way, already in the beginning, but at every stage of managing a project, you will have bottlenecks and constraints of the following form. First, they can be conflicts between what you planned in terms of tasks and the resources you have available to execute the tasks or the budget within which you have to deliver the tasks or the deadline, which is the timing budget, so to say. And the conflict is typically that what you planned in terms of tasks doesn't correspond to the available resources, the skills that those resources have, the budget, or the deadline. That's one type of conflict that you'll always have to resolve when you're managing a project. The other one is in terms of outcomes or deliverable. And that's a conflict between what you plan to deliver and what your internal customers actually need. And so when there is a gap between what you planned as a deliverable versus what the internal customer wanted to get, that's a conflict and a bottleneck to be resolved. What you do when managing a project is come up with solutions that resolve these bottlenecks and constraints so that the goal can still be reached or is reached. And so those are all choices about what to do in a particular phase of the project in order to resolve such a bottleneck, so a conflict between a planned task and a resource, or a conflict between a planned deliverable and your internal customer needs. And so those will be the solutions to your project management problem. And along the way, and especially in the beginning, you will be developing ever more of these kinds of solutions. So they can respond to small conflicts, they can respond to big conflicts. And in any case, you don't solve this at the outset or in the beginning, but this is really a continuous exercise. Within the same continuous exercise, you're also going to challenge your solution. You're going to think of ways that your choices to resolve these particular conflicts are actually not going to fix the conflicts or resolve the conflicts, because you will have undesired consequences from those choices. Even if they affect the bottleneck and the constraints in some way, there can be undesired consequences as well. So it can eventually, if you're fixing a resource constraint, it can eventually still be too expensive, for example. Or when you're fixing a deliverable conflict with an internal customer need, it could be that you still have misunderstood the real internal customer need. And so a challenge could be that you have found new evidence that the internal customer need is actually something different than the one you are planning your deliverables towards. So this is the process again that goes back and forth, that will evolve your solutions, grow them, and make them ever better solutions to the problem of your project, which is in the end to deliver on time, in scope and budget. But the way you eventually succeed in doing that is by iteratively going over bottlenecks, constraints, choices to fix them, and challenges of those choices. So if you are facing right now any of these different business problems, be it a process efficiency problem or sales effectiveness or product definition or even project management problem, and you're interested in this approach, don't hesitate to visit us at rapidimprovement.com. You can book a free introduction to the approach there and a demo of our AI supported online software platform.